Welcome to another episode of The Marketer's Edge, a series designed to share a senior level marketing perspective about marketer challenges, opportunities, and agency relationships. Our goal is to help marketers and agencies learn from other marketers across different industries. Today, we're talking with Kathryn Blume, Managing Director at Hyperbaric Vermont, a company that offers hope to people with many conditions for which standard medical treatment has little to offer. Kathryn, thanks for joining us today. How have you been?
I'm in good, thank you.
Good, good, good. Well, great. I've got a small handful of questions for you. But before we do that, can you tell me a little bit about Hyperbaric Vermont, what you do for the organization? I'd like our audience to know what kind of company it is and what you do for them.
Sure. Well, Hyperbaric Vermont is a small medical nonprofit that's dedicated to providing affordable hyperbaric oxygen therapy to both the Vermont community and beyond. And most people don't actually know what hyperbaric oxygen therapy is. It's something that's very widely used in the rest of the world, but in the US, due to the politics of how medicine works here, it's not nearly as well known. And so a big part of what I do is explain a lot about HBOT to whoever I talk to, and that's what we call it, HBOT. And it's a pretty simple modality. It basically involves putting people into pressurized chambers and giving them oxygen to breathe. And this is actually something that was invented. It goes back all the way back to the 1600s and has been in use fairly actively since the 1800s. But again, sort of like how medicine works in the country means that it has ended up looking like a far more marginalized therapy than it actually is. It's much better research than people think. And like I said, it's very used widely around the world. The sort of secret sauce to HBOT is that oxygen in and of itself is profoundly anti-inflammatory. It heals wounds and it fights infections. And normally when you breathe oxygen, we know this from Bio 101, you breathe, it goes into your lungs, it gets picked up by the red blood cells and delivered throughout your circulatory system. So basically oxygen goes everywhere blood goes. But when you give people oxygen under pressure, it's kind of like when you're making seltzer and you put the water under pressure to force carbon dioxide into the water. Under pressure, oxygen floods all the fluids and tissues of the body. And so it goes to places that normally it wouldn't reach if it was just being delivered through the circulatory system, which means that it can treat a wide range of conditions, including things like chronic Lyme, long COVID, both of which are on the rise in Vermont and many other places. It can treat concussions, help heal the brain, which is not something that medical science thought was possible, help with arthritis, IBS, multiple sclerosis. In fact, in the UK, when you get diagnosed with MS, the first thing they do is they send you into a hyperbaric chamber. So that's the thumbnail of HBOT. And as managing director, what I do, because it's a small company, I do a little bit of everything. I do staff management, I do PR and marketing, I do fundraising. I hold the hand of our founder and help her through all of the challenges of leadership. So it's a lot going on.
Yeah. Are there other companies in the US like Hyperbaric Vermont?
I haven't heard of any other nonprofits like us. Most of the places that offer HBOT, they kind of comes in three categories. There are hospitals, which tend to offer, you get different pressures in chambers. You can get, basically, this comes out of the world, I should back up and say this comes out of the world of diving, actually. And it was often used to treat divers with the bends. And so the amount of pressure, it's sort of equivalent to how far underneath sea level you're going. So there's mild HBOT, which is what we do, which is usually 1.3 to 1.5 atmospheres. It's equivalent to about 10 or 15 feet below sea level. And then you get into hospital grade, which can be up to 2 and 3 atmospheres. And it's a very different experience for a whole lot of reasons. So you get hospitals treating people under high pressure for the 14 conditions that the FDA has approved HBOT for.
Okay.
Then you get functional medicine clinics where they're doing a wide variety of treatments, and HBOT is just one of the things that they do. And then it also pops up most recently in sort of membership wellness spas, Biohackers love HBOT, along with all the things they're trying to do to increase longevity and lifespan and health span. So cold immersion and red light therapy and ozone therapy, all that kind of stuff that the Silicon Valley folks are very, very fond of engaging with. So you see it in a wide range of capacities, but we're the only nonprofit clinic that I know of.
Got it. Got it. And is there an industry behind it, like conferences and other engagements that bring people like you and companies like yours together to share experience and best practices?
Yeah, there's the International Hyperbarics Association, which I
Okay.
believe is out of Wisconsin, and then there's an Undersea and Hyperbaric Medical Society, and both of them offer conferences and trainings. The last I heard, the International Hyperbarics Association was doing their latest conference on board a cruise ship somewhere off the coast of Florida. Sounds like fun. I haven't been, but and I think like I said, there's a wide range of folks who are involving themselves in this too. I think there are always the sort of opportunists who think, oh, that's a good way to make money. And then there are medical professionals who really see this as a valuable component of being able to treat people, particularly for conditions which have been resistant to any other kind of treatment.
Yeah. I'm curious what motivated you to join Hyperbaric Vermont?
It was totally random. My background is primarily spent most of my adult life either doing theater and or climate activism, sometimes combining the two. And about 7 years ago, I burnt myself out. I landed in the hospital with a burst appendix and sepsis, and that was a big before and after moment of my life. And in healing from that, I wasn't going to do the kind of leading the charge activity that I'd used to engage in. And I ended up working in the cannabis industry for a while. And then that the team I was working for sort of imploded. Don't go into business with potheads. And I was looking for the next thing. And my husband, who about 12 years ago did a turnaround and left the theater and became a psychotherapist, said, why don't you go back to school and be a therapist? And so I got into school for clinical mental health counseling, but was looking for a job to get me through school and landed here. And I think as a very small nonprofit, I was probably the most qualified person they could get for the tiny amount of money that they were paying.
Right. I'm curious. Does insurance in any way provide any support for treatments like the kind of work that you're doing?
This is one of the big challenges of providing HBOT because the FDA has only approved HBOT for 14 conditions, and they're all pretty critical, immediate life-threatening conditions: air and gas bubbles and blood vessels, burns, carbon monoxide poisoning, crush injuries. And so that's all fantastic. And in fact, there's some famous people who have benefited from HBOT under those conditions. Jay Leno famously had a gasoline fire in his garage, burned his face, and HBOT was what gave him his face back. Or I don't know if you remember last January, Jeremy Renner, the actor, got run over by a snowplow
Yeah.
and broke 30 bones and all that kind of stuff. And because HBOT's really good for crush injuries, he's been treating with that all along. But because the FDA's only approved these 14 conditions, that's what insurance will cover. So most of how it's being used, particularly in the mild setting where we're offering it, it's completely off label. Not that it's not effective. And we have thousands of studies from all over the world talking about its broad efficacy, but insurance won't cover it, which is why we're a nonprofit. We're trying to keep the costs as low as possible, and then we fundraise to make up the difference.
Is there a file of the kind of person most likely to use Hyperbaric Vermont?
The kind of person most likely to use Hyperbaric Vermont is someone struggling with a chronic condition like chronic Lyme, long COVID, or sometimes it's a more immediate thing like they're about to get surgery. And if you preload with HBOT before you get surgery and then do it afterwards, you will tend to heal faster. We also get people who are treating for cancer. HBOT has a synergistic effect with cancer treatment. So if you're doing HBOT alongside cancer treatment, you can generally reduce the amount of chemotherapy and radiation you have to do because it not only sets up the cancer cells to be more impacted by whatever medications you're taking, but it also will, and I can't tell you how this works. There's studies behind this, but it will reduce the blood supply to tumors. So again, it won't cure cancer, but it will render cancer treatment more efficacious.
You mentioned fundraising. I'm curious, and you mentioned part of your responsibilities being, the marketing of the business. How important or not is marketing and advertising in your world?
I think it's critical, mostly because you were doing education. We're not just letting people know that we're here, but we also have to explain what HBOT is, how it works, and what it works for. And, I've written 30-second or minute-long radio ads for HBOT, and it's tricky to be able to communicate everything you need to communicate in that short period of time. But I think what you do is, as we know, it's 7 hits before people start really paying attention. So it's really a consistency of communication within the community. So I try to use all the channels that are out there in order to sort of keep people feeling aware of what's going on.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how do you market the brand? You mentioned radio. Are there other techniques that you use or channels that you use to communicate what you're, trying to
We do,
sell?
yeah, we do a lot of social media, and also Vermont has something called Front Porch Forum, which is community-based or town-based, depending on the size of the town or community. It's basically an email listserv that people post, I lost my rooster, or I have 4 Nokia tires to give away. And so we'll talk about HBOT there. We'll go to conferences and table at conferences. Last week, I went and spent a few hours at a local gym. I brought a chamber with me. And, that's in a way, the best advertisement is standing there with a giant inflatable chamber. And people walk up and go, well, what's that? And then we can start talking about it. But it's challenging. And in particular, there's a lot of people. In fact, I was at BNI this morning in a local BNI chapter, and I said, okay, show of hands, how many people here have or know somebody with? And I started naming conditions, and hands are going up.
Sure.
People get that it could be valuable, but because insurance doesn't cover it, it's hard for folks to pay out of pocket. And even though you can make the argument, it'll cost you about $2,000, $2,500 to get between 20 and 40 treatments, which can probably significantly improve your health. And a lot of people go, whoa, I can't afford that much. Well, how much are you going to pay for vacation? How much are you going to pay for, your latest toy, whatever you happen to be doing? How much are you spending on clothes per year? But somehow, I think there's this combination of people not wanting to pay additionally out of pocket because medical insurance is such a unfortunate situation anyway. But then also it's tough to get people in for 20 to 40 treatments. And when you've got a chronic condition, that's what it's going to take. So it's a big commitment as well.
Challenging part about marketing your services is?
The most challenging part, I think there's 2 sides of it. One is because we're so small, we don't have the marketing budget that would really allow me to spread the word the way the word needs to be spread. And then the other side of that, again, is convincing people that it's important for them to come in. I think a lot of people also we're like the frog in boiling water metaphor that they use for climate change. We're adaptable. We get accustomed to whatever we're dealing with. And so, people who've had migraines for years, people who have IBS for years, people who struggle with a lot of medical stuff, but they get kind of used to it and they don't really believe that they're going to get better anyway.
Yeah.
And like I said, a lot of people who've come to us have come after they've tried everything else. And so they're willing to try one more thing, but their level of belief in their ability to get better is often fairly low.
Right. Have you ever used marketing agencies in the past?
We haven't. Mostly it's been not having enough money to pay for an agency.
That makes sense. So just changing gears a bit, you kind of alluded to some of this earlier. You've got a very interesting background, I have to say, starting with the time you spent at Yale when you were involved in the Yale Slavic Chorus, and your professional experiences have taken you down, a number of very altruistic paths. Can you talk a little bit about the thread that ties much of it together and how your past experiences you think have benefited you today in the work you're doing at Hyperbaric Vermont?
Well, I think in terms of altruism, that stems all the way back to the very beginning of college, where I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I thought maybe theater, because I'd been doing theater my whole childhood, but I
Sure.
wasn't 100% sure. And then I took a class my freshman year that was an anthropology class that talked about the interconnected nature of all the world's environmental problems and how severe they were. And this was long before climate was even a thing. This was mostly just pollution and environmental degradation. But I had this moment of, I felt like I couldn't possibly live on this planet and not do something to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so I ended up designing a degree in environmental studies and theater, which is, I think, an early form of climate communications or environmental communications. And, that impulse keeps rearing its ugly head and gets me heading off in a variety of directions. And so even with theater, I ended up I wrote a one woman show about the first lady of the United States launching a sex strike to combat climate change, and I ended up doing an off-Broadway run of that in New York, and I've taken it all over the place. And I think sort of a creative response to trying to solve the world's problems is really the theme one way or another. And, when I was doing climate work, I worked with the activist group 350.org, and I did a lot of sustainability stuff, but I also invented a climate and sustainability game that was played across the state. And again, sort of trying to find fun and creative ways to get people involved in solving the
Yeah.
problem.
So how has that sort of fed into what you're doing today and
Yeah,
what? Yeah.
I started doing climate work long before people. I started writing that show actually even before An Inconvenient Truth came out.
Yeah.
So I was ahead of the curve for sure. And then when I worked in the cannabis industry, it was as we were trying to legalize for both personal use and a commercial market. And so I think I'm very comfortable in being ahead of the curve, in being on that early leading edge, where my job is to get people's attention for something that they didn't even know they needed to pay attention
Yeah.
to, and then convince them that this is an important thing for them to pay attention to, and figure out pathways for them to get involved. Once things get rolling, I'm a lot less interested. So like the commercial cannabis market is up and rolling in Vermont. I don't care about seed to sale tracking software. That doesn't interest me at all. And so I think with HBOT too, it's entirely appropriate that they got me before it's a well-known
Yeah.
modality. 10 years from now, I wouldn't care at all.
Yeah. So I searched Kathryn Blume and found that you're also an ordained minister with the Universal Life Church, and it's described as a 60s era hippie church out of Modesto, California, which believes in democratizing the marital process.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that experience and why you got into it and what you like most about it?
My first friend to get married in our 20s got married by a judge, and it was the most boring ceremony I'd ever seen in my life. And as an actor, of course, my first response was, well, I can do better than that. And I had a lot of friends who I figured hadn't gotten married yet. I knew that they were spiritual but not religious, and that they would want someone to perform a wedding ceremony who existed somewhere between a judge or a JP or a traditional religious figure. And I actually liked the idea of being ordained because I like the spiritual leadership nature of performing a wedding ceremony,
Yeah.
but I couldn't think of any traditional denomination in which I would want to be ordained. I'm Jewish, but I don't want to be a rabbi. I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be a Unitarian minister. So what the hell? And then a friend of mine said, oh, there's this old hippie church out of California. They advertise on the back of Rolling Stone. And so I got a copy of Rolling Stone, and sure enough, there they were. And I called them up and I said, hi, I want to be ordained. And they said, great, we'll send you a packet. You'll be ordained as of the postmark on the envelope. And so for my 26th birthday, I got ordained. And I only did a few ceremonies here and there. But then about, 12 years ago, I was in a what's next phase of my life. And I noted that Vermont was a big wedding destination. And a couple friends had just asked me to do their ceremonies. And I thought, maybe this is a thing. And so I tossed a wedding page up on my acting website.
Yeah.
And I got listed on some wedding resource websites, and people just started calling.
That's
And this
awesome.
happened to be about the same time that Vermont had legalized same-sex marriage, or
Okay.
we should call it same-gender marriage now. But we were one of the only places, and Vermont is a great place to come
Yeah.
anyway. And so I got a lot of elopements from other parts of the country, frequently women from Florida and Texas who couldn't get married where they were. And uh, and here's a through line to that altruistic part of me. It's fun. It's really fun doing weddings. It's fun being the special guest star and being part of an important moment in people's lives. But for me, marrying people who couldn't get married
Yeah.
where they lived
Yeah.
was even
Yeah.
better. And every time I would marry women from Texas in particular, I felt like I was kind of flipping off Texas. And that was, that's a big deal. And the pinnacle of all of that is there's a very famous woman named Alison Bechtel who, when people talk about film and the Bechdel test of whether or not the film has more than one woman character and whether they talk about anything other than the men they're involved with, she also wrote a memoir about growing up in a her father ran a funeral home, and it turned into a big Broadway musical. So, and she got a MacArthur. So Alison's fairly well known, definitely in Vermont, but also in other circles. And I got to marry Alison and her partner Holly, and that was incredibly moving to me, partly because I'd loved her work for years, but in large part because I'd loved her work for years, and I'd known her partner Holly in other circumstances. But to be able to help people who would not ordinarily be able to get married,
Yeah.
the social justice component of that is the most important part to me,
Yeah.
for
That's
sure.
so cool. So cool. So I'm going to go back to the boring topics of
Sure.
marketing.
None of it's boring. It's okay.
and just close it out with two questions. So if you were talking to a marketer that was thinking about bringing a new agency on board, and I know you don't work with agencies right now, but you play in the space. Any advice you'd give to that marketer considering bringing a new agency on board?
Yeah, I think this is all about relationship building. Whether whether or not you worked with an agency, ultimately you're working with people.
Hmm.
And you need to find the right connection. And I think the biggest question, and this is true for bringing on an agency or dating or whatever it might be, are you being listened to? Are you being heard? Are your needs being acknowledged? And rather than someone trying to close a sale, when someone's desperate to get what they want to get, you can smell it. And generally, you're not going to have the kind of synergy that you want.
Right.
And everybody's got their own agenda, but fundamentally, an agency is a service organization.
Mhm.
And I'm in grad school to be a therapist. That's a service thing too. And the thing they keep talking about is active listening and
Yeah.
meeting the needs of the person that you're talking to. And if you're not being listened to, or if someone's got their own agenda,
Yeah.
then that's going to be the biggest stumbling block.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm guessing you may answer this last question in a somewhat similar vein, but if an agency was trying to knock down your door and attempting to win business from you, what advice would you give that agency?
Don't try to knock down a door. That's a pretty aggressive way of approaching things. And I think this is where you get me as a social justice, feminist, anti-capitalist kind of person. And it's not that I'm opposed to people making money at all, but I think that kind of like go after the sale, get the clients, do that, like that very aggressive approach doesn't resonate with me at all. And I think people sniff it out too.
Right.
And I'm particularly understanding that the up and coming generation, whom I don't even know what we're calling them at this point, um, is a cohort deeply devoted to authenticity.
Mhm.
This is, it's a group of people who've grown up through the pandemic and school shootings and political division, and they just want reality, and they want authentic connection. And so I think that's what we have to get back around to
Right.
is it's not about the sale, it's not about your numbers, it's about building relationships and serving the cause of the people that you're working with.
Yeah. Well, it's great. Catherine, it's been fantastic talking with you. I was really looking forward to it, after sort of getting your feedback on some of the questions that I shared with you before today's interview and just learning about your background before we even spoke. I knew it was going to be a high energy, dynamic exchange, and it's proven to be just that. And I think you're going to be an inspiration for many who spend most of their world just kind of operating in the four walls of their business environment and don't really take the step back to think more broadly about sort of the rest of the world and the things that we can all do to make it a little bit better. So applaud you for that, and thanks again, and give my best to Vermont, and yeah, you really appreciate you making the time today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot.